Hello everyone, welcome to my vlog. So today is Friday morning, and today I would like to share with you guys a little bit of personal story. It's gonna be gear review, but it's something which probably you guys not expecting. It's gonna be a little bit different, and I would like to actually showcase this camera, which is Practica L2. And believe it or not, this camera is over 40 years old. This is the camera which my dad took images of me when I was born, as well as when my brother was born. This camera captured pretty much all my childhood, all the vacations we had, all the family gathering, Christmas, holidays, like you name it. This camera was a huge part of my life. After 37 years, like a few years ago, my dad gave me this camera. He says like, well, this entire film photography is actually dying, so I'm not using this camera anymore, so you take this and keep it as some kind of memorabilia for you, so maybe you can show to your kids one day which camera was used to take pictures of you. And when he gave me this camera and he said that to me, it was kind of weird that, I was just like, well, why do I even need this camera? Like, it's film. I don't use film. Like, what I'm gonna do with it is probably I'm gonna shovel in the closet and pretty much I'm gonna forget about it. But actually last weekend I did a little bit of cleaning, and then this piece of equipment actually just got into my hands, and it really got me thinking that after 40 years of using this camera is still working. And I started kind of like, looking back at my career, and I've been in this industry for over 10 years, and I used I had like around 12 professional cameras, not to mention some point and shoot cameras in your phones and stuff like that. So there's tons of gear which went through my hand, we never actually think about it, that we technically could have one gear in our lifetime, because that's what happened to actually my dad. And the interesting fact about this camera is that this camera never broke. This camera never was like cleaned. It's still working, and then amount of stuff this camera went through, amount of places this camera visited, and then we actually went to some really crazy places, which was really tough on those kind of stuff. And after 40 years, this camera is still working, which is extraordinary for me, because when I even count my cameras, like I actually buy cameras like literally every year or second year, and I have like a camera, backup camera, third camera, just in case those two might fail. And my dad used this camera for so many years. I never think about backup camera, backup lenses, like things which these days it's like literally impossible to actually deal with. And then I can't even imagine go to the wedding with one camera, because that is just suicide. So the main reason I want to talk about it is I don't want to say that these days we focus too much on the gear, and then I deeply believe that some of us, including myself, and I remember when I started, the gear was extremely important part, and I was just continually thinking about getting better equipment, more megapixels, much more solid cameras. But when you really think about it, every year the quality of those cameras is going down. because I can't even imagine these days having camera for 10 years. Like if you think about it, that's just literally impossible, because after I don't know 3-4 years max, you technically have to upgrade it to something new, something better. And maybe some of you guys don't agree with me, but I have to say that I was spending $5,000-6,000 on professional cameras, and after 3 years, the shutter, let's say, like literally fell out of the camera. Because was just used constantly, and like they also they have certain ratings that this camera, well, technically can take this amount of images, and then you're supposed to, let's say, replace the shutter or something like that. So we know for the fact that these cameras are built for just certain amount of lifetime, and they pretty much done, and then they don't fix them because like they're too old or whatever. So I just want to talk about it because I found this very, very intriguing and interesting, that in 70s or 60s, some of those companies, they were building cameras which could last so long. And and this is the best example. This is something which it's like a proof that those companies, they are able to make those cameras which could last much longer. And also I think that and maybe again I'm wrong, and maybe I'm just kind of exaggerating some of those things, but some of us focus way too much on the gear. We focus way too much on those rings and bells of those cameras, and those companies just keep pushing and keep pressing on us that this camera is better than this one, this camera has I don't know, better colors, better contrast, more megapixels, all the technical stuff which make us think like, well, if I'm gonna have this camera, I'm gonna take better photos. But I think this camera just really make me thinking that what, if I could have a gear which I don't really have to worry about, cameras which could last for so long, and we could just focus on taking pictures, we could just focus on creating images, and that would be amazing, and we wouldn't have to worry too much about, oh well, like my equipment is not good enough, or they're not they're not gonna last as long, and we have to just keep upgrading those stuff all the time, and keep thinking, and just this our mind kind of gets shifted to things which we shouldn't worry about it. We should have cameras which they would work really well, and I think that's what really got me thinking. Like when I pulled this camera out of my closet, and then it's really kind of breaking this stuff down and thinking about how many years this camera was used, how many places got into. I remember we went to the Baltic Sea, which has really soft sand, and this camera was just literally dumped into the sand, and like we were just playing, and it was just like shaking off, and then we were just keep taking photos, which these days, like you just spill some water in some of those cameras, and then they're gonna fry, no questions. So I just want to talk about it because I think this is really interesting, and I think sometimes we say that, well, those companies, they're not able to create cameras which can last much longer, and I think they can, and they're just like the way the world works today. They have to make money, they have to keep selling, they have to keep upgrading, they have to somehow keep this whole thing going, and put a lot of pressure on us photographers that we need the better stuff, we need the better cameras, and the last thing what I want to say, this camera was taking extraordinary images. They were so sharp, they were so good that you know, like if that would be digital, I would probably still use it, but because, you know, the times changed, now we're using digital, it's a completely different story. So I hope that was interesting for you guys. You know, the one thing what I would like to say, you know, sometimes it's cool to think about some of those things, and you know, this camera brought so many memories for me, and I think it's kind of cool that I still have it. And you know, I look at this whole thing from completely different angle right now. You know, this camera took images of my grandparents who actually passed away, so that camera saw so much, and I couldn't be thankful enough that, you know, like my dad gave it to me. And I have to admit that I was so dumb at that moment when he gave it to me, and the stupid thoughts which came up to my mind were like simply ridiculous, but I'm glad I'm some kind of you know, come back to some sense, and now I look at this little piece of gear from completely different angle, because, you know, everything would happen in my life, you know, a lot of those things which I don't remember, and I wouldn't remember because of this, but this camera actually captured those moments, and I can go back, look at those pictures, and cherish those moments, and, you know, bring some of those stuff. So I'm gonna keep this in a safe place now. I'm gonna just hopefully one day when my son will grow up, I'll just show him you know, what cameras they were used you know, long time ago, and I have to say they were really good quality, which, you know, these days is a completely different story. So if you have any comments, if you have something you would like to share with me about maybe some of your experiences, I would definitely would like to hear those stories, because, you know, sometimes, again, I think we don't really think about those things, and I think it's interesting to you know, sit down and then, you know, just look back and then see how the world works, you know, back in the days, and then maybe we could learn something from it. So I would like to wish you guys fantastic weekend, and you know, great photo shoots, and I will talk to you guys again on Monday. So take care, and we'll chat very soon.